All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Alyse Olson and I'm the resource conservationist with the Kendall County Soil and Water Conservation District. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about some of the basics of cover crops, their benefits, and I'm going to share an online tool that you can use to select cover crops that help you meet your goals. But I am not an expert on the topic, so we have a couple guests with us. Our guests are Ashley Hammac and Jason Halm, and I'll share a more formal introduction for them in just a little bit here, but a thank you to them for being with us this evening. Also, Julie Brown from our office, she's going to help me manage the chat box. And she also found a lot of the pictures that I'm using in this presentation, so thank you to her. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat at any time, and towards the end, we'll get to our panel discussion and we'll address those, or if you want to take yourself off mute and ask your questions verbally during our discussion, feel free to do so. During the presentation, I just ask that you keep your microphones on mute to keep down any background noise, and we will go ahead and get started. All right, so starting with the basics, what is a cover crop? It's basically a crop that's grown during the off season when you're not growing your vegetable crops. It's not meant to be harvested or profited from. It is just meant to improve your soil health. And cover crops are becoming more common in agricultural settings, but they can also be used in home gardens. Cover crops offer multiple benefits. They can help control erosion by providing vegetative protection to the soil and holding it in place with their roots. I'm sure we've all seen situations where we've had a strong rain event, and on bare soil, you just can see the raindrops hitting the soil and dislodging those soil particles, and it can create quite a mess. They improve soil structure by decreasing compaction and increasing infiltration, which improves the soil's water holding capacity. And the way that works is the cover crop roots create channels in the soil, which loosen it up and allow for a place for water to go. And you can think of compacted soil as acting kind of like cement. It's very hard and dense. And a good example that I heard someone share was if you're going to drill into actual cement, you typically start with a small drill to kind of create a path, and then you move up to a larger drill. And cover crops kind of act like that small drill. They're in the compacted soil, they're creating those paths for the roots of your vegetable crops. They're also creating paths for water to get down into the soil profile. Cover crops can increase beneficial soil microbes and insects by providing habitat and food for them to thrive. They increase the soil's organic matter. When cover crops die off or are terminated, the dead vegetation and roots start to decompose and provide organic matter to the soil. Living roots can also provide organic matter to your soil. And if you think about what makes up a healthy soil, about 45% of it is your sand, silt, and clay particles. And then the remaining 55% includes pore space and organic matter. And organic matter controls most of the chemical reactions that occur in your soil. And you can kind of think of it as the brain of the soil, telling the soil how to function. Cover crops help to retain nutrients in the soil, or they can also remove excess nutrients depending on the type of cover crop used. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. They help to maintain soil moisture by providing shade and reducing evaporation. And finally, they can help to suppress weeds. And weeds typically establish on bare soil after a disturbance, and they move in to try to protect that soil surface. So cover crops can take the place of those weeds and provide the protective benefit along with these additional benefits. I also wanted to quickly mention a few things to keep in mind when considering cover crops. They offer many benefits, but they can also lead to certain challenges. It's possible for cover crops to become a weed in your garden if they reseed themselves. And to prevent this, you can mow or manage them in some way before they go to seed, or you can let them reseed themselves. Some people don't mind. I had mentioned that the cover crops can maintain soil moisture, but if we're experiencing a dry season, they can lead to decreased soil moisture because they suck up the little moisture that's in the soil. So just something to keep in mind there. Also, some cover crop mixes may lead to increased damage from rodents like voles. When you create that dense vegetation, it just creates habitat that they're drawn to. And lastly, it takes time to see changes in your soil health from your cover crops. It could take several years. Just a few things to keep in mind. And I'm sure Jason and Ashley can share more on this topic when we get to our discussion. Next, I wanted to share this short video with you. This is an example of a slake test where you fill tubes of water up to the top and you have some type of wire netting, and then you put a soil sample into the top of it to see how the soil behaves in waterlogged conditions. So this is an example in an agriculture setting, but you can test this out with your garden soil as well. On the left side, we have a sample from an agriculture field that utilized cover crops and no tillage for many years. And on the right, we have a soil sample from an adjacent agriculture field that did not utilize cover crops and used conventional tillage. So I will go ahead and start the video here. And you can kind of see how the sample on the right just kind of crumbles in the water, and it's very cloudy with all those particles suspended. But this is a nice visual, and it's one that I'd like to share whenever I get the chance. So just a quick replay here. Oops. All right, next I wanted to talk a little bit about selecting a cover crop. There are three types of cover crops. You have your legumes that include species like clovers, peas, hairy vetch. They do a good job of creating nitrogen in the soil, and they do that with the help of soil bacteria. You have your grasses that includes species like oats, wheat, and barley. They provide carbon and phosphorus to your soil. They can remove excess nitrogen from the soil. And with their dense root structure, they do a good job of holding your soil in place. And third, we have our brassicas. That includes species like radish, turnips, and kale. And they do a good job of providing carbon and sugar. They increase microbial activity, and they can improve your soil structure if you have compacted soil. So all three types of cover crops provide benefits. Even if you don't know where to start, some type of cover is always better than no cover. Next, I wanted to share this online tool with you. And I believe Julie's going to share this web link in the chat box. This is the Midwest Cover Crops Council. And I wanted to kind of walk you through their website. It's a nice resource that I use quite often. So at the top, they have a tab called the Selector Tools. So if we click on that, it'll take us to a page that looks like this. And they have a green box here that you can click on. They have their row crop tool, and they used to have a vegetable crop tool, which they say has been under construction. It's been unavailable for quite a while, so I'm hoping in the future they'll get it back up there. But with the row crop tool, you can still get a lot of valuable information on different cover crop species. So for our example, we'll go ahead and use that. So if we click on the green box, it'll take us to this page, and it'll have you input your location, your state and county, and then it has drop-down boxes where you can input different goals that you would like your cover crop to help you meet. So for our example, I put down that we wanted a cover crop that would be a good nitrogen source, a good soil builder, and a good weed fighter. And then they have a link down here for drainage options. And if you know your specific soil type, you can input the drainage information associated with that soil type. For this example, I just left it blank. And then at the bottom, you have the option to check mark either of these options for displaying cover crop type, which is your legumes, grasses, brassicas, like we talked about. And you can also have them group the cover crops by type. So they'll lump them together in a group for you. For this example, I just had them display the cover crop type. And then at the bottom of the page, you'll click the Find Cover Crops button, and that'll generate a page that looks like this. So you have your first column that includes the name of individual cover crops, and these blue, the blue names, they're links you can click on to read more about that specific cover crop. And it'll tell you information like seeding rates, termination information. It'll share potential advantages and disadvantages of that cover crop. So that's helpful. And then next to it, it has numbers here. So for each goal that you input, it will generate a number for how well that species fulfills your goal. So for our 3 goals, we had nitrogen source, soil builder, and weed fighter. So it's this first example, this first clover is showing that it's an excellent nitrogen source, and it is very good at building soil and fighting weeds. And then the next column shows you the type of cover crop. And then these bars over here show you the best seeding time. So the green bar is your ideal seeding window. And on the actual website, if you hover over these bars, it'll give you the exact planting range. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention also was these little light blue boxes with the snowflakes that just shows that the cover crop is suitable for frost seeding. So again, I encourage you all to check it out. You can learn a lot of really valuable information from the site. It's linked at the bottom of the page here and should also be available in the chat as well. Next, I just wanted to quickly talk about planting and managing your cover crops. If you're doing a fall cover, you can plant your seeds directly in the ground after the last of your summer harvest and before the cold sets in, or so 1 month before the first expected freeze. Smooth out your soil bed. And then if you're doing a small area, you can scatter the seeds by hand at the rate for that particular mix or species. And you can find that seeding rate again using the Midwest Cover Crops Council tool. Then just rake to cover your seeds and ensure that the soil bed is kept moist until it germinates. And then in the spring, several weeks before planting, you'll want to terminate your cover crop. And you can do that by mowing them down and covering them with a tarp or plastic. You can rototill them in. And I'm sure Ashley and Jason can share more about this topic during our discussion as well. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that our office offers cover crop seeds for sale by the pound. This was something we started offering last year, and we wanted to provide something to the community that would promote soil health. And we wanted to give people the opportunity to try them out without having to buy a 50-pound bag if that's not what they needed. So we offered a pea and oat mix as well as just red clover seed. And we sourced our seed from Midwest Grass and Forage. We plan to offer seeds again, starting probably, they'll probably be available in August. So if you have a species or mix you'd like to see us offer, let us know. We're open to suggestions. And you can check our website to see when they'll be available, or if you want to get updates on that and would like to be added to our email list, just let me know and I can get you added on that. So now we will go ahead and move into our panel discussion. We have our two guests with us. Ashley Hammac is a soil scientist and founder of Geosmin. I hope I pronounced that right. Agricultural Solutions, which is an agricultural and environmental solutions company. He has received 3 degrees in soil science. His Ph.D. is from Washington State University, his master's from Auburn University, and his bachelor's from the University of Arkansas. Ashley has seen and worked in agroecosystems across the US. So thank you, Ashley, for being with us. And we also have Jason Halm with us. Jason is the farm manager at Green Earth Harvest, which is a mid-sized organic vegetable farm in Naperville. And each year on the farm, they plant 15 acres with straight cover crops and 10 to 15 acres with vegetables, along with either a spring or fall cover crop. And Jason has experience working with about 5 different cover crop mixes as well as single species. And he's always expanding his knowledge and hopes to learn more about intercropping with covers and utilizing terminated cover crops as mulch. So thank you to both Ashley and Jason for being with us. If you have anything additional you'd like to share, feel free. All right, then we will go ahead and get started with our discussion questions. So first, I thought we'd start with questions that some of our participants submitted to us ahead of time, and then we'll move to questions from the chat, or if anyone wants to verbally ask their questions, feel free to do so. I want to be sure everyone gets their questions answered and you have a chance to learn as much as you can. So with that, we'll start with our questions that were submitted. So Jill had a question about, she shared that she has a nitrogen problem and wanted to know more about crimson clover. And she had also shared that she mulched her garden last fall and was wondering what the best method for seeding the clover with that mulch layer in place, how she should go about that. So either Ashley or Jason, if you want to get us started, go right ahead.
Okay, I'll go. And I guess it sounds like she has a too little nitrogen problem, just from what you said. So nitrogen is tricky because you know, it's most often limiting for crop growth, and you know, when as long as water is in abundance, it's most often limiting. And the trick is that the crop requirement, the N to P ratio of of the crop requirement is different than the N to P ratio of a lot of amendments that we apply, like manure and whatever. So if you're applying enough manure to supply enough nitrogen, then you're over applying phosphorus. And if you're applying, to not overload the soil with phosphorus, then you're not applying enough nitrogen. So you can make up that difference, or at least try to, by growing legumes or supplementing in some other way to try to widen that N to P ratio. So I would look for amendments that are high in protein, like fish emulsion. A lot of times has a really wide N to P ratio. If it's like composted manure, those have a very narrow N to P ratio. Oftentimes, it's 1-to-1. So if you're applying enough nitrogen, like I said, you're going to be over applying phosphorus, and over time you're going to build up phosphorus. And then, on a small acreage, small garden, it's not that big of a deal. But if you consider all of the gardens together, then it can have an impact on water quality from the runoff if you have too much phosphorus. The thing that I wanted to make sure I mentioned was that the addition of all the carbon. So that probably why you're having the problem with nitrogen. And so if you're applying some type of amendment that's really high in carbon and low in nitrogen, you have what's called immobilization. So the microbes are, your soil microbes they're wanting carbon and nitrogen. And if there's not enough nitrogen, if you think of it as like in chemistry, they call it stoichiometry, like the balancing of products and reactants and things like that. But it's kind of like making hot dogs. Like you used to make hot dog, like whenever you buy a pack of hot dogs, there'd be like 6 wieners and 8 buns or something like that. So you have to figure out how many packages you need to buy to end up with 0 buns and 0 hot dog wieners. And so what ends up happening is the microbes use up all of the nitrogen trying to consume the carbon. And so then the nitrogen is held in microbial biomass, and there's nothing to that they let go of to go into that's plant available. So that's why it's called immobilization. It's the process of moving away from plant available nitrogen into microbial biomass nitrogen. And so you have to apply enough nitrogen into the system so that the microbes are mineralizing nitrogen too. So they're consuming the carbon and nitrogen, and then they're also releasing it. And that release of the nitrogen then is available to the plant. So you might want to, well, if I were to be able to look at your soil test, I would assume that, folks that kind of go to something like this are probably really good about testing their soil. So if I could see the soil test, then I could probably tell you if that was the problem. But that's just my hunch, is that maybe there's too much carbon and not enough nitrogen. So anyway, I've probably talked too long about that.
Just a follow-up, you said with too much carbon, and she had mentioned mulching. Would the type of mulch that she's applying be a contributor?
I'm just imagining like wood mulch, and so that's a really high C to N ratio. It has a lot of carbon, not much nitrogen. So if anytime you mulch, especially if it's incorporated, I mean, if there's any incorporation of that mulch, then you get like tie up of nitrogen. and even if it's, you know, on the surface, you can get tie up of nitrogen. So, and there's a lot of, I see these YouTube videos of people like with permaculture, mulching and stuff, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but just got to be careful that you're not like starving your crop of nitrogen when you do that.
Yeah, and I know we've seen it on the farm. We get free leaves from the city, and so over the winter, if it's like too late to cover crop, we mulch a lot with leaves and kind of let them degrade over the winter. But we've noticed that if and leaves, I believe, are a little less imbalanced towards the carbon than like wood chips, for instance, but on the carbon nitrogen scale. But we've noticed that if there are spots where the leaves have not decomposed over the winter and we direct seed in, even when it's not a very thick like mat of leaves, that we have things do not germinate well. And it's not, I don't think it's because they can't break through this, you know, small barrier of leaves. It's because some nutrient is really tied up that just does not allow them to germinate. So I would be a little, if there's really any not fully decomposed mulch, I would be a little, I mean, you can try it, like, but I think that might present issues germinating much of anything into that.
The other thing with leaves is there are certain leaves, and a lot of people know this, I know, but I feel like we should at least point it out that some leaves are what's called alleliopathic. They actually will prevent like oak and walnuts particularly are alleliopathic. So that's why you don't see much growing under an oak tree or under a walnut tree. Well, if you know, you can I have seen a lot of grass growing around walnut trees, but if you use those leaves in your garden, it can really what's it called, it's like basically like the compounds that are in the leaves come out and you know, kind of suppress any type of other plant growth.
Great. Okay. Thank you both for that. Jill had a second question. She had mentioned that she also has heavy clay, and so she purchased daikon radish seeds to help address that. And so I was wondering if you could talk about the impact that will have on her soil. And also she was wondering, since they're a cool weather plant, if she planted them now, would they just bolt right away?
We've never used daikon as a cover crop, but we do seed a couple of beds of daikon every year, and different varieties for sure. But you know what you use for cover crop and what you use to grow a vegetable crop. But we would seed ours. It's coming up probably within the next 3 or 4 weeks. I would have to look. So they usually don't bolt on us. I wouldn't be too worried about it. If it gets really hot and dry, they may, but if you keep them well watered, they should be, I would think they would be fine, but I've never used them as a cover crop.
I've seen a lot of large scale farmers use that after wheat. So if you've seen people harvesting wheat in your area, then you can probably plant. And I like some plants are photo, like they're photoperiodic, I guess, so to speak. And others are temperature control is what causes them to flower. And I'm not sure, I think they're like brassicas are more heat more heat than light controlled. So if you wait long enough into the growing season, then they won't bolt, but they don't survive the winter. Yeah, that would definitely, I think, help loosen up that heavy clay.
And
Yeah.
for daikon, like it'll smell. That's probably honestly the biggest impact that you'll see. But I would be curious. Our soil is not incredibly heavy, but it's like good kind of prairie clay loam, and I'm really curious about using daikon. I think it's probably a good idea if you have fields that just hold water a little too well.
Do you have another, Jason, do you have another species that you would use if you had kind of compacted? You said that you don't really have an issue with clay, but do you have like another species that you would recommend for people who have heavy clay soils?
I think daikon are great for like heavily compacted or clay soils. They that it's pretty crazy how long they can get and how forceful the roots can push into soil. We will harvest daikon sometimes that are over a foot long fairly regularly, and some of 2 inches, 3 inches wide. One that I really like that we use not a ton of, but a few fields every year. It doesn't break hard pans or create deep channels, but it builds soil. We use a good amount of sorghum sudan grass. Very weed suppressive. Also, it just grows very vigorously. And yeah, it builds a ton of soil.
Great, good suggestion. All right. Next, we had a question from Janine. She was wondering what cover crops are best for small raised beds.
I would say, if there's any other, goals, I would want to know what the other goals were too, because you can really grow a lot of different stuff in a raised bed. So that might be, I might try like a really high diversity mix, like a lot of different ones, something like that, where you can kind of one of the issues that large scale farmers see is they have this sea of one species, and whenever that happens, that's when you're basically inviting pests, whether it's weeds or insects or diseases or whatever. And the problem is it's like a buffet. They can go from one to the next to the next to the next, and they have nothing to break up their, and so if you can use cover crops to insert diversity into your system, to where they go from one to the next, and they're like, oh, I don't like that one, and they can't like complete their life cycle. So and that's what you see in nature, and that's why you don't see these outbreaks in nature of pests like that. So I would probably just try to go really diverse. You don't have to worry as much about things kind of getting out of control. You've got like a smaller space you can work with. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think any cover crop you can do in a not raised bed, you can do on a raised bed.
And you had mentioned, just kind of going off that, you had mentioned the benefit of diversity. I feel like for maybe some beginners that could be a little intimidating. Do you have a good example of maybe a mix for people who are new to cover crops that maybe is a little bit easier to manage, but would kind of get them started with cover crops, which I realize is probably a hard question, not knowing any of their goals or issues.
Well, I would say if anybody's first, just starting out, I would go with things that winter kill.
Okay.
And that way you got a clean garden, in the spring. And then with, as far as things that winter kill, there's a lot of different ones that you can put in there that would make it diverse. Oats would grow very vigorously in the fall. Mentioned radishes before, that winter kills. Rapeseed is another one that is in the Brassica family and also has that like long tap root, kind of like radish. So that would be good for kind of finding those, breaking up a dense layer in the soil. Clover, basically any kind of clover up this far north is going to winter kill. Any summer species, sorghum sudan, foxtail, or those are some grasses. Cowpeas, Austrian winter peas, vetch. A lot of these are going to winter kill and have other benefits as well as including diversity. So and I'm glad you mentioned the MCCC cover crop selector tool, because I use that all the time, and you can just kind of go down the list and see what's available and what works for you.
Yeah, that looks like an awesome tool. I'm excited to explore it a little bit. I think if you're like new to it and a little intimidated, like Ashley said, having something that winter kills is a great idea. I know sometimes we end up with one of our fields where it's like a wet spring, we're just like, oh dang, we have to mow this and then disc it and then disc it again, and it just keeps coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, eventually, a couple discs and almost every cover crop gets terminated, but yeah, having something that's winter killed, getting a clean field or a clean garden like that is takes out one major obstacle or one big thing you have to think about.
Great. Yeah, those are good suggestions. And then Janine's second question that she had was she wanted to know if she could use cover crops to fill bare spots in her yard, and if so, what species and what would be the pros and cons?
Again, I would. I mean, you can definitely do that, and that would probably give you, some good protection against weeds coming in. Probably something that's going to, I would assume that you would want the turf to fill in. So maybe put something that's going to winter kill again, and then you can like interseed the turf grass seed, in there. So it winter kill, I'm not real sure about like the best time to seed turf grass. I usually, if I'm going to do that, I put a little bit out in the fall, put some out in the spring, and you kind of get more, coverage that way. But if you did that and then you had like a nice like kind of straw mulch layer coming out of the winter, and you probably get pretty good germination. A lot of times you don't get, if you got bare soil and you put grass seed on it, it doesn't, it washes off, or it you don't get good soil seed contact or whatever. But if you were, if you were to use that, like maybe like oats, something like that, planted in the fall in that area, and then put down some turf grass seed along with it. I think that would probably be pretty good.
So using it as just like a temporary cover until that grass has a chance to
Right.
fill in.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. All right. Anything to add to that, Jason?
No, I think that's really interesting. Like, because when you seed turf grass, you'll see a lot of times people use kind of a straw mulch on it. And I never really thought about that before, but I guess seeding oats at winter kill could be like that straw mulch.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting. I've never thought about that use for them before.
Yeah. Another one would be annual ryegrass, and that one would actually look more like, if in this part of the world, people use perennial ryegrass and Kentucky bluegrass and bunch grasses like that. So annual ryegrass would kind of blend in very well.
Great. Julie, did we have any questions come in through the chat? I'm going to see if I can pull that up here.
Yes, ma'am, you do. So Jeffrey just asked, do you have any recommended cover crop species that are native? I didn't see any on the snapshot of the MCC selector tool. Some species on their list would be considered invasive by ecologists.
Yeah, that's a big concern for some people. In fact, the wheat scientist at Purdue, he was really anti-annual ryegrass, so he'd probably be disappointed in me for throwing that one out there. But it's one that people use, and for a lawn, I don't think it would. You're going to mow it before it goes to seed. But yeah, as far as natives, I'm trying to think of some natives. Natives are tricky because they, it's. I know some perennial natives, but those are not good cover crops usually. But something that's easy to germinate and not not weedy. I mean, you can have a weedy native, just like you can have a noxious weedy exotic species. So I would, if you're into that, which I like natives more. I'm more of a natives fan for like ornamental, landscape plants. I've never done it for my garden. But yeah, if you're into that, I would look for something that is easy to germinate and doesn't have that weedy nature to it.
Yeah, it's one thing that I don't think you'll get a lot or maybe really much of the benefit from or that you would try to get from having cover crops in general, but you could do sunflowers. I mean, the varieties that you're going to get are not actually native. I mean, they're highly cultivated varieties. Someone in the chat said that they use, I think, lemon balm. Their backyard. Oh, and thinking that's a separate question. But you could use sunflowers, but I doubt you're going to get a ton of the typical cover crop benefits. But it'll look really nice. I don't know if that's kind of an ornamental, kind of could be used as a winter killed cover crop in some cases. But that's really the only native that I can think of that even loosely fits the bill.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've never even thought about that for use for cover crops.
Alyse, the next question, Mo Ting says, is there cover crops that store water? So when planted under trees, it will not take water from trees during dry days.
I mean, if it's growing, it's using water usually, and it's, you know, it has that cover crop growth habit. Let's see. I think I would probably want to know more about the goals there too. Yeah, just probably just something that was more low growing, didn't have a whole lot of biomass to it, because the more above ground biomass you have, the more below ground biomass you have as well. So maybe some type of low growing cover or something that maybe when moisture was when there was limited water, maybe it might go dormant. And I don't have anything off the top of my head that fits that criteria right now. But
do you think with trees and their root structure, if you were to plant a cover under the tree, do you think it'd still be taking the same soil moisture that the tree would be using, since trees tend to have such a branching root structure? Do you think
yeah,
that's something to consider?
It would probably depend on how well established the tree is. If it's a big giant tree, it's probably not going to be phased by anything growing under it. It's going to have, it's going to be more likely to suck up the water from the cover crop. But yeah, the active roots on a tree are kind of they're on the outside, they're not like right up around the base of the tree. So if it's a big tree with a big canopy, the active growing roots are like kind of along the drip line around the outside of the tree. So, that as long as it's got plenty of moisture kind of in that zone. And I don't imagine this being a huge problem unless you were trying to get the tree established and it was a newly planted tree, because you have lawns that are competing for moisture with the tree also, very often. So I don't foresee that as being a real issue unless it's you're trying to get it established, which in that case, best time to plant a new tree is to do, either in the fall or in the spring, so you don't get that water limitation problem, and it can kind of get some roots established. But even if you did do it in the spring, if you planted it in the spring with a summer like we're having now, you'd really want to water it, make sure it got established well in the first year, especially because it hasn't rained enough to keep a perennial tree like that going.
Chris asked, what would you recommend for pathways or around vegetables in the garden?
It probably depends on how big your garden is. We've, so we have, our beds are about 5 feet wide, and we've taken to just kind of letting the walkways between beds kind of grow, whatever grows there, and just mowing them, because the closest they are to any of our plants are kind of, you know, at least a foot away, if not, I mean, typically quite a bit more than that. And although I'm sure that isn't the best thing to do, it's not the limiting factor for any of our plants. So there is that option of kind of just letting things come up and just mowing. We've also, I've seen people do some interesting things kind of in the fall or very late summer, like August-ish, intercropping and throwing, this isn't for walkways, I guess, but throwing down like a winter rye over their garden and letting it germinate and come up. And by the time they've harvested, the winter rye is starting to take over and become a cover crop. But obviously that's pretty tricky because you're sowing something that will directly compete with your vegetables. We also tried one year having clover in between beds. We usually use like a medium red clover, and that's not a bad idea. It's pretty low lying, fairly low lying, at least in our context, and can smother out a lot of weeds, but it grows really vigorously, especially if you're watering enough. And so you really, anything that you can like control is good, basically, and keep from overrunning your actual vegetable crop, I think. But it's tricky. You kind of have to be careful, and yeah, you just have to be careful.
So watch how close you're getting to your vegetable crops and pick something that's easy to control.
Yeah, and then you can kind of fly a little closer to the sun as you get a little more comfortable. You won't see me out at any point sowing rye under broccoli plants yet. That might still be a few years off for us even, but come September, there's not really much more time left, or come the end of August, there's not much more time left, really.
Alyse, that was the last question. There were a few other comments that everyone can see in the chat box, but as far as questions, that was the end.
Okay, great. Thank you, Julie. If anyone else has questions and you want to put them in the chat, or if you want to ask them verbally, feel free to do so. I have a few other questions here that we could go through. So I guess we will get started with some of those, and if you have any additional questions, just shout. What would you say is the biggest challenge when using cover crops that a beginner might face? You both had kind of mentioned when selecting a mix it's kind of nice to do a winter kill. So do you think termination is a big challenge for beginners just starting out with cover crops?
I kind of work with all different kinds. So I like my garden to be organic, at least no pesticides. I will use, conventional fertilizer, but if you're using herbicide, it's pretty easy to, But I'm assuming this group is going to be fewer people that are using herbicide and more organic techniques for termination. And so that makes it tricky. So like you can mow, but like a lawnmower is not gonna, if you have a lot of growth, that like vertical growth, that's going to be tricky. You can imagine like just you're going to kind of like push it over and not really get a good cutting from it. And then if you till it with your tiller, anybody that's done that a few times has experienced, kind of wrapping around the tines and so just know what you're getting into. If you plant something that's going to survive the winter, particularly like cereal rye or winter rye, it really takes off fast in the springtime. As soon as it warms up, it's going to get tall real fast, and it's going to be a challenge to either mow or till. Probably what I would attempt to do is to do both: mow it, then till it. And you're going to have multiple passes, and you're going to have to clean off the tines and all that stuff. So just enjoy the process. Don't get too frustrated.
Yeah, I think in the spring, yeah, I've never been able, or we have never like terminated cover crops by just mowing. You will definitely have to rototill them, or remove this contact between the soil and the roots somehow. Another option that we use sometimes in some of our much smaller growing areas, like we use this in a couple greenhouses that we use for the spring and fall production. So we go from June 15th till we're trying to get in there sometimes as early as August 15th, usually kind of at the end of August, to prep it. And we'll be able to fit in sometimes a buckwheat cover crop in there in those few months. But we'll mow it, and then we'll put sometimes a silage tarp down, so a really heavy tarp, and that can go a pretty long way towards terminating it. You may still have to get in there and get some stubborn stuff, but it's definitely a two-step process. And yeah, I do think terminating is like the trickiest part of cover cropping. Everything else about them is awesome.
One other thought is, for the home gardener, or for small scale, you might try like a weed eater or weed whacker. That way, it's when you go in to cut it, it's standing up straight, rather than pushing a mower over it. It's going to lay down, and then the blades aren't going to be able to get to it. So if you can cut it real close with the weed whacker, and then let that biomass just sit there and break down a little bit, kind of get brittle, and then go after it with the tiller, that would probably be a good strategy. In terms of other challenges, if you don't get your cover crop in early enough in the fall, you won't get enough growth going into the cold season, and that can be frustrating. So like if you're going to try to get something that's going to winter kill, I would say probably don't try to put like a fall crop in that spot. If you're going to have a fall crop, you're probably going to, that's maybe either going to be your cover crop, or you're going to have something that's going to survive the winter if you want to do that, because you're just not going to be able to get something in and established early enough, after a fall crop. And with the summer crop, you can do it, but you got to be on the ball. You got to get it in and established to actually get some benefit out of it. Otherwise, it's just you're not going to really get much benefit out of it if it doesn't grow much. And it needs to be warm. It'll, a lot of them will stay alive once it gets cool or cold, but they won't grow much. They won't like put on a whole lot of biomass. So you want those like warm fall days, plenty of those warm fall days still.
Yeah, and it really, it really depends on your context too. For us, like, I would love to water cover crop after we seed it, but the reality is that if it's a dry period, the cover crop is our last priority to water. The actual vegetable crops get watered first. And so that's a challenge for us, but I don't think in a home garden or in a home setting that would really be a huge challenge for most people. But just to speak to Ashley's point about getting it in on time in the fall, the fall is really, that early fall is really like, it's sometimes a race for us. There's one year recently where we harvested our last winter squash, pulled up all of our plastic mulch, disked the field, seeded it, and then lightly disked the seed into the field again, all in like a day. Because it's like when the end of August comes, it's the earlier you do it, the better. Obviously after your crop is out of the ground, but.
And then Jason, what type of rotation or cover crop are you putting in the fall, after you're getting your summer vegetable crops out?
Yeah, that's a great question. The winter kind of mix that it's not much of a mix, it's more of a combination, but the winter combination that we typically use is winter rye and hairy vetch. And the vetch, I forget if it comes up a little bit in the fall, but the rye is really like really what comes up in the fall and survives through the winter, and then the vetch really takes off the next spring. And yeah, so that's our typical winter mix that we're seeding in August, and as late as early September, but I prefer to get it in August if at all possible. Something seeded in September will do fine typically, we found, but just be a little smaller. That's our primary winter one. And then the clover that we use is one of Ashley mentioned that virtually all clovers are winter kill at this latitude. The one that we use, medium red, it's one of the very few that's not. I always forget if it's mammoth red or medium red, but it's one of the very few that's not winter killed. But we're seeding that in like the spring and then having that in for an entire year, and then terminating it the following spring, and then planting summer stuff in after that. But to follow our summer crops or early fall crops, it's rye vetch.
Okay, and then I saw a comment from Janet in the chat. She, I think we kind of mentioned this earlier, but she said that she uses lemon balm in her backyard, and she's thinking of using white clover to cover the soil and be interspersed amongst her native plants. Any thoughts or comments to Janet's comment?
No, I'd be interested in knowing, like, how that turns out. what the benefits are for her. I've not heard of anybody using that before.
And then Jessica commented on Jeff's question, and she said, I think native plants would be tricky as a cover crop because most native are perennial and planted to persist there over time. She said, although prairie strips throughout or around a home garden or field could be a nice compromise that persistently promotes pollinators and edge infiltration. So that's a good comment.
Yep.
And then Jeff, he asked, does tilling partially defeat the purpose of cover cropping / regenerative ag? It breaks up the soil structure and microbes that you're striving for.
It's true. So you have to think of tillage as like a cataclysmic event for soil microbes. It's in terms of succession meaning like in ecology terms, where you start out with, if you had a bare soil, you'd start out with like pioneer species, like what we typically think of as weeds. And then over time, that would develop into like a prairie, savanna type system. And then you'd get shrubs and small trees. And eventually you'd get an old growth forest, unless you have a cataclysmic event. And each time you have a cataclysmic event, it resets it back to the pioneer species. And so in nature, we don't see cataclysmic events very often, fire, floods, like a tree falling over and like, throwing up its root ball. Those are examples that happen in nature. But for our gardens, our farms, whatever, we do it, when we till. And so what that does is it resets the soil life in terms of succession. And the only soil organism that can really survive or thrive, so to speak, in a system where succession is being reset is bacteria. And any species above in a higher trophic level than bacteria is going to have trouble surviving a heavily tilled soil. So Jeffrey is correct, that it does break up the soil structure, and it breaks up the succession of the soil microbiota, and so if you're going to till, I encourage people to add carbon. You're going to have to add more carbon to kind of reverse that breakdown of carbon that you're going to have from tillage, and then to minimize tillage, everywhere else. Whenever, if you have to till, then you have to till, but anytime you can avoid that, I'm a proponent of that. And so there are people that are doing like no-till organic, and one of the parts of that system is roller crimping or terminating cereal rye. And so you wait until the cereal rye gets to like kind of headed out, where it's starting to fill grain inside the head. And if you terminate it at that point, either by roller crimping or mowing, you can get it to stop growing. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but you can stop it from growing And I think actually now that I think about it, on a small scale, I would probably just try weed eating it, letting it get as tall as you can let it get, and then weed whack it. And then you've got like a nice mulch layer you can plant into that. You're going to have to, dig with like a shovel or a spade, and that's kind of like tillage, but you're going to have that added benefit of not breaking up your soil structure, and all that soil structure, not only does it enhance the microbial succession, maintaining that, it also enhances like your water infiltrability. You're going to get water, going down deeper. Also, anytime you till, like just under where the tillage implement goes, it's nice and fluffy all above that, but like just below that, it's like you're pushing down on it, and that's what the plow pan is that dense layer the tiller goes. And so you're fighting against yourself in a lot of ways actually when you till, for vegetable farming or vegetable gardening. But you can do it. I mean, I'm a firm believer in where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, we didn't know how to no-till farm until we started trying to do it. So, there's a way. You just have to, try different things, see what works, and expand on what works.
Yeah, and I think on a small scale, especially, like there's no till in the sense where it first came about, which is if you're, kind of growing on large tracts, you burn down with an herbicide spray, and then you don't have to till. You can just kind of run a seed drill over it to put in like corn, soy, so on and so forth. And then much more recently, there's the no-till organic style, which that Ashley mentioned, that would be, using a roller crimper. One way that I've seen people do it on a home scale is having like a wooden board, and then having kind of ropes on either side, and just using that to almost crimp your cover crop by stepping on that wooden board and holding the two ropes up here. I've never done that myself, but that's a possibility. Although, weed eating, I think, is probably more of a sure thing to do that, get that done. But then you have to, as Ashley mentioned, seed into, or kind of, cut away and dig out a hole with the shovel, which is tillage on a much smaller scale. I will be really interested when I see farms doing no-till organic vegetable production on like a mid-size or large scale. I'm sure that there are a few out there doing it. I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure there are a few out there doing it though. And the other thing, tillage is pretty disruptive to soil life, to the soil ecology. I always recommend people who are gardening, and whether you till or not, to use a broad fork or use a shovel to kind of get in and do almost what the daikon radish cover crop would do, which is to just make some of those really deep channels, kind of break apart any hard pan that you're getting from if you are tilling, and let some water infiltration happen. The other thing though is that agriculture is not a natural system, and so that's something that I always have as a context too, is that what we're doing, even when it's organic, is a pretty cataclysmic event, on the broader scale. It's only 9 or 10 or 12,000 years old, which is kind of it's a very new invention. And so, doing a little bit of tilling, I don't think is the worst thing in the world, but it should be used sparingly, like Ashley said.
And Jason, you had mentioned that about half of the farm you plant in straight cover crops to kind of maximize those soil health benefits that you can get from a cover crop. So you just kind of allow those beds to rest for a year or so to kind of build that soil and get those soil health benefits from the cover crop without trying to kind of fit it all in 1 year with vegetables, then a cover crop, and then coming back in with more vegetables. So that if people have enough space, that could be a potential practice that they could incorporate, just kind of allowing certain beds to rest, maybe plant a cover for a year or so, kind of switch around that way.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I don't think it's something you have to do or have to necessarily aim for. I think for us, that's almost a function of like, there are 30 acres and on the farm, and the farm started on this property as like doing an acre and then kind of grew almost exponentially. And so our equipment and processes all have to kind of catch up to that. But I could foresee a time where we're cover cropping every field every year, but also have a vegetable crop in nearly every field every year, which I think is a little more common. There are vegetable farmers that I know and have heard of that are just like, I don't let a bed go without a crop for more than 5 days. Like they're out and I get the next thing in as soon as possible. And that just sounds like a nightmare to manage on a large scale, but yeah, leaving that much kind of fallow for a full year or in cover crop for a full year has a lot more to do with our capacity, I think. But I would love to get a vegetable crop and a cover crop in every field every year.
Okay.
In the future.
All right, let's see how we're doing. We'll maybe take a couple more questions and then we will try to wrap up. I don't see any additional questions in the chat, so we'll kind of move down our list here. Can you give some examples of the benefits that you've seen through your experiences with cover crops, and how long would you say it took to start seeing those benefits? And I guess I mean kind of that you've like physically seen, like from either from soil testing or weed suppression, things like that.
Yeah, a lot of them you can see, right away. Like weeds, if you're organic, it's going to take a while to you keep, suppressing them and, keep at it. And eventually you'll see, it's like a compounding effect over time. You stay with it. Similar to like the soil structure development. You're not going to get like soil structure development and, I mean, you'll see more than you saw the year before, but like right after, tillage and a rain, that kind of like destroys your soil structure. But so, without tillage and doing cover crops, you'll kind of see that soil structure. Like when you dig it up, to plant, your plant that's already been started, you can kind of, it's easily crumbles. You don't have like these big chunks or clods of soil. They're like bricks. It's kind of like cottage cheese, you know, like just falls apart in your hands. That takes a little bit to develop. And then, you know, the pests, you know, it like with the increased diversity, and I like to, you know, in my garden, it's like a mess. It's like hodgepodgey. I don't really concern myself with weeds. Once I've done like once I've weeded once, and my vegetable canopy kind of closes out, and you know, I don't really worry too much about weeds after that. But you know, to see the effect of like the diversity, the insects and things, beneficial insects, that takes a little bit of time too. But like something like nitrogen, you're going to see, you know, that's going to, if you take if you can allow the legume to get to the point of flowering, you're going to see a benefit of nitrogen. It's going to make nitrogen once it gets to flowering. It's made some nitrogen. So, and then like having the mulch layer, if you have like a really sandy soil, that mulch layer is going to, you know, help you keep water, you know, where you don't have to water as much. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say necessarily cause and effect, but I know that over the past few years, I think by chance, we kind of happened to start doing, you know, so we'll seed this red clover in April, like the field that we have tomatoes and tomatillos in now. We seeded red clover in last April of 2021, mowed it a few times as it's coming to flower, or as it's just getting really kind of out of control, and then terminated it this spring, planted tomatoes in. But that kind of pattern or succession we kind of stumbled upon a few years ago. We were like, oh, wow, those tomatoes were really good. I wonder if that had something to do with the clover that was there the year before. And we've had most years since really good tomatoes, like really strong crops. And that does seem to be like Ashley said, something that we noticed almost right away. And I've been at this farm for 7 years now, and I do think the soil structure has started to improve. Again, is my memory from 7 years ago, like, you know, fully reliable? I don't know, but I know this year when I was disking a few fields up, I was just kind of amazed at how not cloddy that soil was. So it seems like we're starting to see quite a big difference. But that is kind of along with the weed, and I haven't seen a change in weeds at all, so can't really speak to that. But both of those are, you know, much longer term projects for sure.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised at some of the kind of quicker results that you guys had mentioned. I think I was under the mindset that, you know, you're going to be waiting a while before you really see too much change. So I feel like that's really hopeful.
The thing that takes, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
The thing that takes a really long time to build up is organic matter. And one of the misconceptions that I see a lot of times with home gardeners is that they're stockpiling like some kind of like mulch or straw or, you know, something like that, and they think they're building their organic matter, but really what they're doing, they're just accumulating this kind of like mulch layer on top. And soil organic matter is like, when we measure soil organic matter, we brush away all that stuff that's like on top, and then take a sample of the mineral soil that's underlying and measure the organic matter in there. That takes like 10 years, you know, five years minimum to see a change in organic matter. But I apologize, but I'm being kicked out of my space that I'm in.
Okay.
So I have to go.
Go right ahead. I think we will go ahead and wrap up there. So thank you, Ashley and Jason, for your time. And thank you for everyone for joining. If you have additional questions, you can send them my way and I can try to get answers for you. But thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Alyse. Thanks, everybody.